Hello and welcome to the operational case study for August 2017 pre-scene analysis from Astranti Financial Training. So my name is James and I'm a co-director here at Astranti. Been with Astranti for several years now, and at one time or another I've been involved with pretty much every single aspect of production within the business, including the case study exam, so you're in safe hands with me. Just to go through a few more things, I'm a mock writer, so the case studies, when they started for CIMA back in 2015, we've been doing specialised case study products ever since. One of those are mock exams, and I've written several of the mocks that we've released over the years. And I'm also consider myself something of a case study expert. Like I say, the case study exam started back in 2015, and ever since then I've been involved in one way or another with pretty much every pre-scene and case study. That's at operational management or strategic level. Been involved in pretty much everyone in one way or another since its inception. So I know a lot about how the case study works, how the pre-scene works, and how the pre-scene sets itself up for the exam later on. In addition to that, I've also actually written a real case study exam for CIMA back in 2015. We wrote a CIMA Asia exam that was actually used for in a real exam over in the CIMA Asia region. And so not only have I been looking and experienced with case studies for a few years, but I've actually written one as well. So I've wrote the pre-scene, and I know what's involved and how the pre-scene is a really good guide to the kind of things that's going to come up in the exam. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, I'm one of the main study text authors here at Astranti, and I've been involved again with pretty much every study text that has come out, and that includes all levels and all pillars. So my actual area of expertise are the finance pillar, so the F1 and F2 study texts, but I've worked on the enterprise pillar and the P pillar as well, so there's not really much that I haven't looked at in my time here. I've got a good general all-round knowledge, which is perfect for the case study exams. So what can you expect from this video series? What are we going to do? Why is it worth anything to you? Why is it worth your time? So the first thing we're going to do is we're really going to take the pre-scene that's been given, and we're just going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, looking at every little detail as we go through, because as I said, getting to know the pre-scene and having a good understanding of the pre-scene is really the best way to be prepared for the exam. So what particularly we're going to focus on are some of the key points. So as we go through, I'll be making key points, areas that as I read through I think, well, that's definitely going to be an important thing, and that's almost certainly going to be relevant at some stage in the exam. We're going to be having some industry guidance on how it relates. So I've spent the past few weeks going through everything that I could find on the particular industry that we're involved in on this occasion, and I'm going to be bringing that to the pre-scene and making it relevant and applying it to the scenario, so we have a real world feel for how this all fits together and what kind of things the company are going to be dealing with. We're going to be looking at all the key business models, so of course we're going to be thinking about Pestle, Porter's forces, all the kind of business models that we can use to assess and analyse the company, their areas of strength, the weaknesses, and how they may go forward in the future, what kind of things you could say in your exam, because often your role is to advise or to give some kind of information, and one of the best ways to do that are using the classic business models. We're going to be picking up likely exam issues, so those first 3 points there, they all kind of feed down into what are likely things to come up in the exam. And like I said, I wrote one of the pre-scenes for an exam a few years ago, and so the best thing to do really when you're approaching the pre-scene is to kind of read between the lines and think, well, CIMA have written this pre-scene, they've made up this company, and it is a real life industry, but it's a made up company, and you've got to think, well, what areas are they setting themselves up for, so they can think of exam scenarios when it actually comes to the exam. So if you look at it in that way, think, well, why have they written it like this? Probably because they've got an exam question that they want to ask about that particular area. So as we go through, I'll be picking out areas of the pre-scene that I think are very likely to be coming up
in the exam. And as well as that, I'll be giving some exam hints and tips. So at Stranti, we've got a couple of study texts and textbooks on specifically how to pass your case study exams, and I was heavily involved in the writing of those, so I know plenty about the exams and the extra little tidbits and tips and things that can help you to get through the exam beyond just pure knowledge and application. In addition to the pre-scene videos, so there's going to be a number of pre-scene videos just looking at the pre-scene, we're going to have a strategic analysis, and that won't necessarily involve looking at the pre-scene in too much more depth. We'll already have covered that. This is kind of a big picture, broader look at the company, where they stand and what they can do going forward. And we'll have a specific video dedicated to the top 10 issues. So I'm going to give you 10 things that I think are very likely to come up in the exam in February based on the things that we'll see in the pre-scene. And there's usually a pretty good track record here at Astranti. We're quite proud of the fact that our top 10 issues, more often than not, most of them are things that actually come up in the exam. So that's what you can expect, and here's how it will work. So in the section by section pre-scene videos, I'm going to assume that you haven't seen the pre-scene yet. And you can assume that I haven't really seen it either, because I've been through it a little bit, I've made some notes, but a lot of it we'll be doing as we go through. So you can assume that I'm not going to take any knowledge for granted here. And so what you can do is, before you watch my video and see what I say about it, have a go at reading through it yourself, make some notes, and see how much you can come up with on your own. See how well you do there. And when you've made your own notes, come back to the video and have a look at what I've said, and then maybe see if there's anything that you've missed out or not covered in enough depth, or perhaps there might even be things that you think are good points that I haven't covered myself. And you're welcome to leave a comment and perhaps add anything that you think we've missed out. You're perfectly welcome to do that. And at the end, we'll go through the strategic analysis video and the top 10 issues video. So in total, you're looking at, depending on the length of the pre-scene, sort of 8 or 9 videos in total. So just a few quick notes on the actual pre-scene and your approach to the pre-scene actually that I want to make before we start looking at the thing itself. Context is key here, so the whole idea of the pre-scene is to set up this realistic scenario, this realistic world in which this business operates. And so it's important to always think about the context when we're looking at the issues. Don't write a thing based on the pre-scene before the exam. So do go through the pre-scene in a lot of depth and get as much out of it as you can, but don't assume that you can sort of write your answers to questions before you go into the actual exam, because, as you know, we don't know what's going to be in the exam, and you might waste your time focusing on this one particular issue, and that's one of the issues that doesn't come up in the exam. So don't try to write anything based on the pre-scene. Just use it as a way to learn as much as you can about the business, so you can be well prepared in the exam. And the real function of the pre-scene, as we said, it's the background. You're really, if you imagine that you are in a real business, for a moment, just suspend disbelief and imagine that you have the actual job of finance officer or whatever it is at this business, and that you're going to be asked to advise or analyze or evaluate certain areas of the business to your boss. So the best way that you would ever be able to do that is to know as much as possible as you can about the business you're working in and the industry they're working in. So that's all this is. The pre-scene is kind of this report that gives you the key information, as much of it as possible, so you can give good answers in the exam. So that's the best approach that I can advise that you take when watching these videos and getting ready for the exam.
Right, so let's get back to the pre-scene and get started on our analysis. So the company is called Premium Trains, and they are a train operating company. Now, before we actually get into the pre-scene to look at the details, the first thought off the top of my head is this is a really great opportunity here. This is a really interesting kind of company. It's an interesting industry. There's going to be lots of things that we can look at to help us analyze this pre-scene. Obviously, there's a whole industry in the UK for a rail network, and there are going to probably be a lot of similarities with that, so we can use that as as a comparison all the way through. But just to begin with, this looks like it's going to be a nice, good, interesting precinct for us to get our teeth sunk into. Okay, so on the first page in the introduction, we find out that Thailand is an island nation in the Northern Hemisphere with a population of 30 million. Already we can see that there is probably some similarity with the UK here. Obviously we won't go ahead and say that it's based on the UK, but the fact that it's an island nation in the Northern Hemisphere with a medium-sized population suggests that we're going to have a similar train company to perhaps one that is based in the UK. It has the T dollar as its currency, and it has a developed railway system which supports extensive passenger and freight services. So the key things to take from that are probably the fact that it's a developed railway system, so it's used by millions of people, it's highly advanced, it's probably got lots of investment in terms of developing the technology, it's probably forms a central part of how people in the country get around that country, and it also supports extensive passenger and freight services. So as you would expect, it's not passenger only, it's freight services as well. We don't know yet whether the company are a freight service provider, but obviously that would be a whole other element to consider if that were the case. So this system was wholly government run until 25 years ago. Let's highlight that because that's going to be an important point. So much like the rail system in the UK, which was privatised in the early 90s, looks like the railway system here in Thailand was government run as well until 25 years ago. Making it again the early 90s, when the passenger services were privatised. Okay, so starting to get interesting now. The government retained ownership of the rail, track and station and the stations, all of which are now managed by Thailand Rail, a government-run organisation. Okay, so there's actually quite a lot we can talk about just from this first paragraph. Let's try to think about some of the material, some of the models and ideas that we've found in F1, P1 and E1, which of course are the key study texts on which you're going to be tested. So one of the most useful models that a company can use is a Pestle Analysis, which is a tool used to analyze the external environment which can impact an organization, and we use a Pestle Analysis for finding the opportunities and threats in our Swot Analysis, which we'll do later on. But for those of you who can't remember Pestle, it is an acronym, and the P stands for political, E stands for economic, S for social, T for technological, E for environmental, and L for legal. And basically these are 6 key areas in which an organization can be impacted by external influences. And we can see here the fact that the railway system was only 25 years ago entirely government run, and in fact the government retained ownership of the actual rail track, and that's managed by a government run organization. We can see there are going to be significant political impacts regarding any company that operates within this industry. For example, if you imagine the fact that in this country, assuming it's a sort of Western social democratic country, anytime there's an election, there may be a new government, and they're going to have their own ideas about how the Thailand Rail go about their business and what kind of regulations and tariffs are set for companies that operate on the rail track. And so there's a big element here in which political issues can greatly affect any company that operates within this industry. Also, just thinking about trains and what they actually do, there might be an argument that there are going to be some environmental issues. Obviously, trains use fuel and various other non-renewable energy sources to power their trains, and that's going to have an environmental impact. And so there's going to be probably some issue around electrifying trains or making them use renewable sources so they're more environmentally friendly. Also, technologically as well, kind of links in. There's going to be investment in developing the technology used and making trains more efficient, making sure that they can last longer, that they're more durable as well. Okay, so let's move on to the next paragraph. So at the time of privatization, the passenger services throughout the country were split into 8 mainline routes and 25 short routes. So a route is going to be the full length of a line that runs between 2 terminal stations, and there are 8 mainline routes, and those are supposedly will stretch from much larger sections of the country, perhaps from regions to other regions, and you have 25 short routes. So all in all, that's not that many routes, but obviously this is a pre-scene and we can't get too complicated, and so they're keeping it nice and simple for us. Mainline routes are the longest routes in the country and create a network that links all of the major cities and some of the largest towns, with Central City being the capital of Torland. Shorter routes connect cities and towns throughout the country. Many of these short routes are used by commuters. To travel to and from their places of work in these cities and towns. So there's a large commuter population, and obviously commuters generally will have no other choice really but to catch the train, which means there is a large amount of business to be done here because people need to catch the train to work, and it's often the most popular way to do it. Many people can't drive, or it's not economically viable for them to drive, and so they catch the train. Now, each route has a train passenger service franchise associated with it, and the 33 franchises were issued to a total of 10 train operating companies. So that means that of the 33 routes that exist in Torland, these were essentially split up and given to the 10 train operating companies. So we know that whatever company we are, premium trains, we have 9 other companies that are train operators in the country. So Premium Trains is one of these companies. Each franchise was for an initial period of 15 years. So 25 years ago would have made it 1991, 92. So there would have been one renewal period already, and every 15 years there'll be a renewal period, which presumably is the main way that these companies are competitive, because there's perhaps the incentive that in 15 years, when the franchises are for renewal, if the train company haven't done a good job, then they may not have their franchise renewed. And this is actually an interesting point for a system like this, because what you have essentially are a number of franchises that are given to these 10 operating companies. And each operating company, much like in the UK, will have essentially complete control or be the only service that runs in certain parts of the country, which means they have no competition. There's Train Company, which is a private company, even though it runs on a government-owned network rail. The private companies are the ones that are providing the service. They make a profit from running this service, and in fact they don't really have any major competition because they tend to have these lines all to themselves, which isn't good incentive to really focus on customer care, customer satisfaction, good ticket prices, because there is no really alternative. People have to get these trains, and if this is the only provider on this line, then customers can't protest and get another train provider. Now, obviously, they could protest by getting different forms of public transport, perhaps getting the bus, cycling, or driving themselves, but generally there's low competition. But the way that competition is instilled is having these 15-year periods in which franchises can be reallocated, presumably after 15 years. So at the end of the initial franchise period, the first 15 years from the early 90s to the 2000s, all but one let's highlight that. All but one of the train operating companies were awarded the same franchise for a further 15 years. These included Premium Trains. So it is possible to lose your franchise, but generally it looks like of the 33 routes, only one train operating company didn't get the exact same franchise for a further 15 years. So again, that puts questions over how competitive this is and what kind of environment results from this sort of a system where, you know, it's a sort of half government run, half private system. It's an interesting situation, and as we go through, I'm sure that will come up again, and we'll find interesting peculiarities that are specific to this industry that will make the analysis more interesting. And in fact, to give you a real life comparison, in the United Kingdom we have Network Rail, which is essentially what Torland Rail is. And in the UK, Network Rail are a government-run organisation as well. They own the actual assets of the network, of the train, the rails, and the infrastructure of the rail system, but they don't actually own or run any of the train companies. Those are all private, and much like in this scenario, the companies are assigned certain routes on which they operate almost exclusively. So to give you an example, in the southwest of England, the major train company there is Great Western Railway, formerly First Great Western, and pretty much to get from any place in the southwest to another place in the southwest, you've got no choice but to use Great Western Railway, whether you like them or not. Now, arguably, it's different to see how it could work in any other way. Obviously, with a train, you've got one line, and you can't just have companies, you know, putting any old service on whenever they like. It's got to be kind of carefully regulated to make sure that it's efficient and functions. So if this is the case, then this is a kind of semi-privatization of the rail lines, not a full privatization. But nevertheless, the company that we'll be looking at, Premium Trains, are a fully private company, and so we have to treat them as such, and we'll do our analysis as with that in mind. Okay, so let's move on a little bit further then. So Premium Trains is a subsidiary of the Omni Travel Group, which has a number of other subsidiaries in the travel sector. So the important point here, Premium Trains is a subsidiary. We don't know at this stage what percentage Omni Travel Group owns of Premium Trains, but if it's a high amount, then that means obviously they are pretty much an owned business. They're an investment of Omni Travel Group, and so this is going to have an impact on the way the company is run. The shareholders are necessarily going to be directly shareholders of Premium Trains. They're more interested in Omni Travel Group, and that might change some of the policies and the way that dividends are paid and the general financial approach to the company. Okay, so continuing on. Premium Trains' sole activity is the operation of 2 train passenger service franchises in Torland. Okay, so there's a really important sentence for us. So Premium Trains, they operate 2 train services, 2 of the franchises, 2 of the lines available in Torland. That's all they have. And it is a passenger service only. So Premium Trains is nothing to do with freight. It's all passenger service. And so we kind of can narrow it down and focus on this. And that makes it slightly easier for our analysis, because if Premium Trains were a freight provider, that would be a completely different approach. So they're a passenger service franchise, and they have 2 lines. This is going to be this is their core. We're starting to learn about the core sort of identity of the company and what it is they do. Each of these franchises is for one of the mainline routes. So they actually have, of all the routes, you know, there are 8 mainline routes and 25 shorter routes. 2 of the mainline routes go to Premium Trains, and so that's a 25%. That's a quarter of all the overall mainline trains. And so of the 10 operating companies, they seem to have a pretty good deal there. Obviously, though, this implies that of the 10 train operating companies, if there are 33 routes up for grabs and Premium Trains only has 2 of them, then a lot of the other companies have much more than 2, perhaps 5 or 10 lines each, perhaps shorter lines, but still we don't know yet which would be more beneficial. Presumably the mainline routes get the most business, but we'll see as we go on what the case is on that. So you are one of a number of finance officers, so we're learning a bit about your role within the company. And this bit is always the same, no matter what pre-scene it is you're looking at. Over the last 4 or 5 pre-scenes that I've seen, this has always been the same. You're one of a number of finance officers who work within the finance department of Premium Trains. So basically, you're an accountant at Premium Trains. You're fairly low on the ladder. You may not have been there for very long. There are a lot of people above you just in the finance department in itself. So you're very much at the bottom and you're kind of just given tasks as and when they come in. Your role is varied and you are often moved to different parts of the business to perform tasks. And this is basically just how CIMA can make it so that if something comes up not directly related to something a finance officer would normally do, finance officer would normally just spend most of the time, doing the books and balancing accounts, or perhaps putting together reports, or some sort of like basic clerical work. But that wouldn't be enough to show your knowledge of the full syllabus for operational case study, and so they build this in. You're often moved into different parts of the business to perform tasks, and that opens it up to a wider field of questions. So that is an important point. Don't think going into this that you're just going to get a load of questions on basic financial accounting or management accounting. You could get a question from pretty much any section of any of the 3 papers on which it's based, E1, P1 or F1. Any of the various syllabus topics could come up. Certain topics are more likely to come up than others. If you want to know more about that, then you can check out our study text on that. We have an operational case study text, part 1 and part 2, and in part 2 we have all the major areas of the syllabus that are most likely to come up in this exam. And of course, at the end of this video series, we do the top 10 issues, in which we sort of predict the most likely issues to come up in this exam, so you can prepare around those. Okay, so let's keep going through and move on to the next page, because we've learned a bit about the industry so far and how it's set up and Premium Trains sort of position within that industry, but we don't know a whole lot about the company yet, and so we wanted to learn a bit more about how it all works. So on the next page, we're given some performance statistics from train operating companies, and so let's just go through this and see what we can learn from this information. So the following extracts are taken from the Thailand government's report on the performance of Thailand's train operating companies in 2016. So that would be for last year. And here we find out actually who the main competitors are, or the main players are in Thailand, and what the number of mainline routes that they have each. So we can see here that there are East Trains, Filton Trains, Nexus Trains, North Star and Premium Trains. So that's 5 of the train operating companies. Remember that from the first part we learnt there are actually 10, and so here are 5 of the 10, and these are the ones that have all of the mainline routes split between them. So from this information we can see that Premium Trains at the bottom here, we know they have 2 mainline routes, and we know that actually no other company has more than 2 mainline routes, so they're in a good position there. And in fact, some companies only operate on 1 mainline route. Possibly some of these companies also operate on the shorter routes as well. And remember that this is only 5 of the companies, so there are 5 of the companies that operate solely on the shorter routes. But the good thing is that if we rank each of the revenues earned from 2015 to 2016, which is what we have done here, in the first position, we have East Trains, who, like Premium Trains, operate 2 routes, and they made revenues of 263 million. But not far behind was Premium Trains, down in second place here, who made 234 million. So of all the companies, of the five that operate on the mainline routes, Premium Trains made the second most in profit, and then behind them was North Star, also earning, who also operate on two, and they made just over 200 million. And then much lower down on the companies that only operate on one route, and their revenues, as you might expect, are significantly lower than the top three. So currently, only the two routes operated by East Trains are high-speed routes. Okay, so East Trains, obviously they were top, they were number one, they made the most revenue, and they're the only company that operates high-speed routes. Now, a high-speed route is essentially just one with a quicker train service. So to get from one end to the other end of the line, the high-speed route, they either have less stops in between, or the train stops less frequently, or they have higher, more developed trains that can run at a higher speed. That potentially costs more money to do, but more desirable particularly for commuters who want to get to their destination as quickly as possible. So in 2019, the route operated by Filton Trains, so Filton Trains, if we look at the chart up here, were one of the they only operate on one mainline route, and their revenues are a bit lower because of this, but they're about to get a new high-speed line, which might make them more popular, again, amongst commuters or anyone who wants to get from A to B slightly quicker, and it's currently under construction. Each of these high-speed routes is electrified. So what we can sort of glean from this is the fact that electrified routes, high-speed routes, seems to be the way that the country is trying to develop the network, so that, over time, each of these mainland routes will probably be updated to be a high-speed line in the future. And what you could perhaps imply from this is that once East Trains have got their two routes, Filton Trains, they're having a route electrified, it could well be that Premium Trains and the routes that they operate on, one of their two lines is going to be electrified, which means them going under construction and the whole hassle then of managing a train company whilst one of the major routes on which you operate is, undergoing construction work, which means different train services, delayed services, reduced services, the whole issue there of trying to work on something at the same time as operating it at full capacity. So that could easily be something that comes up in the exam. And it's an interesting point because a lot of factors spill out of it. We can ask the question, to what extent do Premium Trains get a say in whether their line is electrified or not? Is it something that they want? Obviously, in the long term, it may actually be beneficial to them, but they may run calculations on it and look at the cost analysis, look at the risk assessment, and find that it's perhaps not worth it to have that done, and the short-term cost will be very high, and that would perhaps upset shareholders, whatever it is. And so there's all these issues that come up with it, and to what extent can their position on it be overruled by the government, who ultimately they're the ones that own the network rail, or the Torland rail, and they're the ones that can develop it when they want to. And so it might just be a case of, well, tough luck, Premium Trains, we're going to electrify your rail, and you're going to have to figure out how to deal with it for the 2, 3, 4, 5 years, however long it takes to fully implement. Also on the other side of that as well, it might be that the next in line to get a high-speed line would be a different company, perhaps Nexus Trains or North Star, and Premium Trains are at the bottom of the list, and they actually want to be electrified much sooner because there is a benefit to being electrified. And so is there anything that they can do to bring forward the electrification of their line to introduce a new high-speed line? So lots of issues surrounding this, and it definitely, to me, reading through that and thinking about it, seems like this could be an issue for the actual exam. Okay, so moving on again, we have this chart here that tells us a bit about the punctuality performance measures on the mainline routes. And essentially what we have are the 5 train companies that operate on mainline routes, and we're told a bit about how often their trains are late, how often they're on time, and how often they're very late. And we have at the top here Nexus trains. So if we just go through these in order, Nexus trains arguably have the worst performance because the number of on-time trains they have is less than 60%, and quite a big chunk of their trains are often late, and actually very late. They have the biggest chunk of all of them. And going down, we actually get better and better, arguably, as Filton trains have more on-time trains and fewer later trains. Premium trains we actually find are smack bang in the middle. They actually seem to have a good record for on time. Looks like to me that's around about 90% of their trains are considered to be on time, which means about 8% of their trains are late, and only 2% of their trains are very late. So what do these actually mean? So the key at the bottom means on time means less than 10 minutes late at the final destination. So actually, if it's on time, it can still be up to 10 minutes late at the final destination. But since this is applied to all of the companies equally, it doesn't put premium trains in any particularly bad position. It's just that might annoy users of the trains who think that, well, if I'm 10 minutes late for my final destination, how can you really say that that's on time? But that's not really here or there. Late then actually means between 11 minutes and 30 minutes late at the final destination, and very late means them more than 31 minutes late. So basically anything later than half an hour is very late, or a cancelled service is considered to be very late. And so in this graph we have to include all cancelled services within the green. And again, premium trains, pretty good record here. They have had a few very late or cancelled trains. North Star and East trains, on the other hand, don't have actually any very late trains. All of their services most of them are no more than 10 minutes late, and very small amounts are actually up to 30 minutes late. No cancelled or very late trains. So this is an area in which premium trains could probably try to improve in their punctuality. Obviously, it's a very important part of a well-functioning train network in a country for the trains to be on time as much as possible, because that's what people depend on to get from where they are to where they need to go. So premium trains, they're in a good position. Actually, of the 3, they are closer to the top 2 than they are to the bottom 2. But there is still some improvement there. If they could completely get rid of their very late or cancelled trains, or perhaps reduce the number of late trains, then they would be on the way to improving themselves and would perhaps be in second or first place here. Another interesting thing to note a bit about this, and something we've sort of already touched on, is the fact that the lateness of a train impacts massively the public perception of the train services in that country. And in the UK, lots of people who use trains regularly are often irritated and frustrated at how often trains appear to be running late, and how there's nothing that they can do about it. If you, like I said earlier, if you want to catch a train in the southwest of England, then you pretty much have to use this one train company who basically have a monopoly over the stations in the southwest. And if they're late, then you can complain, and up to a certain amount of lateness you can claim a refund, but there's nothing more you can do than that. It's not like you can say, well, I'm going to catch this other train company instead. And if you have to catch the train, you really don't have much of an option. You can try to catch a bus service, but often bus services will take longer. They can be expensive, less direct, more transfers and waiting around. So trains do tend to be more convenient. But on that note, there is something to the fact that it seems that people, if the train services are poor enough, then people only get the trains if they absolutely have to, and will take any measure they can to avoid catching the trains. They'll try to drive or get a lift or get a coach or a bus, and they only catch the trains if they really have to. And that may seem like not too much of an important point, but if that's the general consensus in the population of a country, that, oh god, I've got to catch the train, I'd rather not, I'll only get it if I really have to, that's going to have a major impact on the revenues that these train companies can make. And rather than, people regularly getting the train because it's an enjoyable experience and they're being taken to where they need to get, they're getting there on time, they're getting there in comfort, and they haven't got to worry about driving themselves or anything like that, then that would be a real boost to any train service in any country, because you've got all these people using the train services because they want to use it and not because they have to use it and they've got no choice. Just an interesting point that I thought I'd bring up, because the way that a company is perceived can greatly impact the way how much money they can make and how many people want to use their service. Okay, so we're going to continue on to the next page, and we're going to look at the information here, and what we find on this page is some more charts and some more graphs regarding the entire situation of the mainland lines. And again, we haven't actually found any specific information on premium trains yet. That will come in the next video. So here we have a list of the train companies that operate the short routes. And as we know, since there were only 5 companies before, there are going to be a number of new companies that we haven't seen before on here. And they all have a number of short routes allocated to them, and they make various profits or revenues from that. So I think what we'll do here first is just highlight the companies that operate both on the long routes, the mainline routes, and on the shorter routes. So East Trains was a company that had 2 mainline routes, as were Nexus and North Star Trains as well. So all 3 of these companies not only have some number of mainland routes, in fact let's carry that information down. So East Trains had 2 mainline routes, Nexus had 1 mainline route, and North Star had 2 mainline routes. Each of these have a number of short routes as well. So East Trains, is in addition to their 2 mainline routes, they have 4 short line routes. Nexus have 2, and North Star have 3, and each of these generates them fairly significant revenues as well. So in addition to East Trains' 2 mainline routes, which earned them 263 million, they have 176 million from their 4 short line routes. Obviously the profitability of each route here is much lower for these short routes. So if we just take an average here, we find that East Trains, if we just divide this amount by 4, they're making roughly 44 million per route, whereas on their mainline routes, East Trains made 263 million over 2 routes, which works out at about 130 million each. And so that's obviously, that's almost as much as all 4 of these short routes operated together in a single mainline route. So in terms of revenue, there's a lot more revenue to be made from the mainline routes. But at this stage, we don't know the associated costs and whether the costs of running a mainline route make it so that the overall profits are actually greater, whether short routes are more profitable than the mainline routes. So at the moment, 30% of the short route network is electrified. By 2020, they hope to have this rise to 40%. So in terms of actual amounts, that works out at roughly 7 to 8 tracks. Short route tracks are currently electrified, and they want to get that up to 10 tracks by the year 2020, over the next 3 years. So that's an addition of 2 to 3 more fully electrified short route tracks. And again, the table underneath here is punctuality performance on the short routes and the information on what constitutes late, on time, and very late. And we can see that in this case, short routes are much more likely to experience late or very late trains. Now, we may be wondering, since premium trains don't actually operate on a short route, why we're given so much information about short routes. Well, knowing how the pre-CIMA works and how CIMA works, they wouldn't include this information for nothing. And so what we could perhaps take from this is that something is going to happen, something in the actual exam perhaps, which will involve premium trains in short routes, or some kind of analysis of short routes will be needed, because obviously there's probably a slightly different approach to how you'd operate on a short route to how you would on a long route. And perhaps it might be the case that you're asked to do some kind of analysis of the most profitable short route companies and see what they're doing on the short routes, and if there's anything that can be applied to the long routes. It might be the case that premium trains are offered shorter routes, and they're trying to decide whether to go forward with that project, and all of this information then would become very, very relevant. So some interesting things to take from this. One thing is the fact that the company called Speedy Trains are by far the poorest performer in terms of punctuality. So almost just over 50% of the trains are actually on time, which is quite ironic given their name. Now, another interesting thing here is that the difference between measuring lateness for short routes and mainline routes. So the government deems short routes to be late after more than 5 minutes, but mainline routes are not considered late until it's more than 10 minutes late. So the difference recognizes the relative difference in the length of overall journey time. So that's just information on why there's a slightly different way of calculating that. Okay, so we will end the video there in terms of the number of pages that we're going to look at for the pre-scene. But what I like to do at the end of every video we do on the pre-scene analysis is a quick SWOT analysis. And so what we'll do is just find a bit of blank room on the pre-scene up here, plenty of room. And what we're going to do, we'll do this together, is a SWOT analysis. So remember, for those of you who don't, a SWOT analysis is a way of analyzing a company in terms of their strengths for the S, weaknesses for W, opportunities, and threats for O and T, and it spells out SWOT. That's where the name comes from. And what I would like you to do is to pause the video now and just take 3, 4, 5 minutes, however long you want, and jot down some ideas. So if you grab a piece of paper and write down something like this, where you've got the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and underneath each title, just jot down some ideas on what you think are the various strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for the company. So strengths and weaknesses, just to remind you, are going to be things that are of the company itself. So strengths that premium trains have in and of themselves, that are kind of internal strengths, that the way they go about doing business and the way they operate and their position. Similarly with weaknesses, this is weaknesses within the company, what they're doing wrong and perhaps things that they're overlooking. Opportunities are external things to the company, things that they could take advantage of in order to grow and move on and become a more successful company. And again, threats are again external to the company, and these are things outside of the company that threaten the way the company does business and could have a detrimental impact. So take a few minutes now and jot down some ideas. Unpause the video when you're done and come back, see what I've got, see if you agree, see if you come up with some of the same things, and then that will be the end of the video. Okay, so admittedly we don't know that much about the company yet, but there are a few things you could pick up on just from what we've seen so far. So in terms of strengths, the 3 things I've got are the fact that they've got a good punctuality performance. Of the 5 main service providers, they were 3rd, but actually overall they were closer to the top 2, and they had most of their trains were on time, and only a few of them were late, and only a very small percent were very late. So they've got good punctuality performance. They've got 2 mainline routes, which is the maximum that any company has. So of the 5 companies, the most any single company has is 2 mainline routes. So that's good. They're in a good position there to compete. And they've got the 2nd highest revenue as well. So after East Trains, who were the top position, Premium Trains are in 2nd place with the most revenue and on their 2 main routes. So those are the major strengths of the company from the information we've seen so far. Okay, so moving on to weaknesses. The major weaknesses we can gather from what we've seen so far is the fact they have no short routes. So of the 5 companies that have mainline routes, 3 of them also have short routes and make reasonable profits from that. But premium trains only have mainline routes and they have no shorter routes at all, which limits them only to make revenue on their main routes. And in addition, they've got no high-speed rail. Actually, at the moment, East Trains are the only one of the companies to benefit from high-speed rail. None of the other companies do, and that includes premium trains. And so as far as we know, there are no plans to have their electrified tracks in order to allow for high-speed rail. That is not on the cards as it stands. Okay, so what opportunities then are available to premium trains? Well, for one, if we're looking at our weaknesses, one opportunity then could be for them to try and get short routes. We don't know if that's possible, if it's entirely up to the government, or whether they can apply for certain things, whether they have to wait for the first 15-year term of the franchise to end before they can do anything about it. So we don't know, but it's worth putting down that for them to get a short route is an opportunity for them. Another one is to improve punctuality. At the moment, they do have some very late or cancelled trains, and they do have some late trains, so it would be great if they could get that down to no very late trains and only a very few late trains, if at all possible. Also, to have one of their lines electrified in order to allow for high-speed rail. That would be a good opportunity for them as well, because high-speed rail is desirable for most passengers and customers. And finally, moving on to threats, we have 2 major points that I found here, and they are related to our Pestle points, P-E-S-T-L-E. The first is political. We mentioned this earlier. The company do seem kind of bound to what the government wants to do. And to give you a sort of real-life example, in the UK at the moment, there is, we're in the process of a general election. By the time this video comes out, the election will have already been called, but during the run-up to the election, a lot of the parties, one of the parties had argued to renationalise the railways. Now, if that party had managed to get into power, then obviously that's going to have a major impact on any kind of company that operates in the trains. So if the train services are renationalised, what does that mean for a company like Premium Trains? Are they bought by the government? Are they sort of included in it, or are they just sort of left to die and the government puts in their own service? So that's obviously a concern for any train company when there's a serious chance that, we don't know too much about the politics of Torland, but it's always a possibility that since it was once a nationalised industry, it could be renationalised if the politics go that way. And also there is a social threat too, so people's attitude towards trains, and I made this point earlier, that people's attitude towards trains seems to be, well, I'll only get it if I absolutely have to, if I have no other alternative, because often trains are overpriced, the tickets are very expensive, they are packed, there's not enough seats for people to sit down, particularly on busy commuter trains. They're often late or delayed or cancelled, and so people don't feel that comfortable relying on train services, and they'd rather not use it if they have to. Most people don't have the choice, and in that case, train companies are lucky, but they are missing out on a lot of potential business because people see them as a last resort. And if their train companies could change the social perception, if they could really make an effort, and the trains are always on time and they're comfortable and there's good customer service and there's always a seat, if that could be done, then people would be more happy getting trains, more willing to get trains, and that can only be a good thing for the train companies. So that is our brief SWOT analysis based on the first few pages. I appreciate that we haven't learned that much about the company yet, but I think doing the SWOT analysis has helped us to get a sort of a picture of the overall industry and where premium trains are within it, and where they could hopefully like to be within it over the next few years going forward. Okay, so that's the end of this video.
all that remains for me to say is thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. And I'll just take a few moments of your time, if I could, to just tell you about some of the other case study materials that we offer. So one of the things is a study text. Now this is a study text specifically aimed at the case study, and we have one for each level. So we have an operational, management and strategic level one, and they're designed to help you pass the study. They're in two halves. The first half is exam tips and exam strategy and advice on how to answer questions and all the really useful kind of tips that you need going into these exams and how to prepare for them. And then the second half, the second part of those, is a recap of the key theory that always comes up in the case studies again and again. So those are really useful, really valuable thing that you can get. Those are available online, and you can get an actual textbook, a printed physical textbook for the old-fashioned among you who like to do it that way still. We also have course videos that correspond with that study text as well. So we have a series of really nicely well-produced, well-done videos in which we basically take you through exactly what's involved in the case study and how you can spend your time preparing for it to ensure that you get really good marks. It's really, really great series of videos there. We've got the pre-scene analysis, which the video you just watched is an example of the pre-scene analysis, and there'll be several more videos just like that where we look at every tiny detail of the pre-scene and we relate it back to the P1 or F1 or E1, and we relate it to real life scenarios, relate it to actual business and analysis tools, and we give you the what we expect to be the top 10 issues. Another thing that we do is slightly different is the industry analysis, and that is this is a really great document in which we basically cover everything that's relevant to the industry for the particular business that we're looking at. And it goes from their history through to the customers and suppliers and the market and how the market has functioned and the history of that. And we've got statistics in there and diagrams, and it's full of information. It's so useful. And at the end of that pack, we also have 25 actual industry examples, so real life things that have happened in that industry, that kind of examples of things that might actually happen to the company in the exam. So it gives you a sense of the kind of things that are going on in the industry and how real life businesses in that industry have coped with it. We have mock exams, which are, if you were going to pick any one of these to do, I would suggest it was the mock exams, because nothing prepares you for the exam more than actually sitting a mock exam. And if I were a student taking this, I would certainly put mock exams at the top of my list, along with marking and feedback. Now, our mock exams are actually designed to match the way that the actual CIMA exams are, so you can sit them on your laptop and they'll be timed and automatic, and they are as close as you are going to get to the real thing. And you can get marking and feedback on that as well, which is probably the most valuable thing you could probably get. To get specific feedback from a marker who deals with this exam 4 times a year, that's the best way for you to improve your ability to pass this exam as quickly as possible. We also have a masterclass, so as an online company we hold an online masterclass which you can sign up for, and it's a day over the weekend. We do the Saturday and a Sunday, and it's a full day's worth of we have an expert who takes an online seminar, and we go through everything specific to that case study that you can do to get prepared for the exam, and we cover all sorts, and it's very, very popular among students who like a one-on-one kind of classroom environment in an online situation. We also offer pass guarantee, so if you're unlucky enough to not pass your exam the first time round, then there's no worries, because we give you the option. If you choose a pass guarantee option, then as long as you hit all the minimum requirements that we ask, and you don't pass, then you get access to our materials for the next sitting completely free of charge. So there's something that we're doing to try and get you. Hopefully, if you signed up to our course and you do everything that we say you should do, then you probably will pass first time. That tends to be the way it goes. But if you should be unfortunate, if it's a particularly tough exam, then we'll let you have another go for free.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you join me in the rest of the pre-scene analysis, where we'll be doing video and analysis much in the same way that we've done so far. And actually in the next video we're going to get much more in depth in the actual running of premium trains, and we'll learn a lot more about the specifics of the company. I hope to see you there.